Thank you everyone for joining us. Once again, I'm Jeremy Park with cityCURRENT. This is our Get On Board session, our Get On Board series. It's a quarterly series that we have been hosting for a long time with the Assisi Foundation of Memphis, Inc. And so amazing teammates in this effort to help lift nonprofits, to help empower you and provide you with great content and information that you can use to leverage to be able to help us lift our nonprofits. And so critically important that we help our nonprofits make a difference and expand the impact. And so that's what this series is focused on. As I mentioned earlier, all of these topics that we discuss come from you. And so you reach out and you let us know these are the challenges, the opportunities that we see. And so we go out and we find experts to focus on those topics, and then we put together the event so that we can share it with all of you. And one of the ones that has been coming up a lot is around events, fundraising events. The game has changed, especially you look going through the pandemic and now coming out. And so things are very different. We obviously host a lot of events through cityCURRENT, so we see it firsthand. And so we thought this is a great opportunity for us to bring together a panel of experts to be able to share as panelists their thoughts, their experiences, their lessons learned, and to talk about how to create successful fundraising events. And obviously it's a continually evolving conversation that we're all having a part of that, but this is a chance for all of us to learn and to see how things are different, but most importantly, how we can leverage all of these dynamics to create change, good change, to power the good, to help lift our nonprofits. And so I'm going to introduce the panelists in a little bit officially, but we want to kick it off with Dusky Norsworthy, and she is with Behind the Scenes. Behind the Scenes is a longtime partner with us with cityCURRENT. You see their team out. They help us produce and host all of our cityCURRENT Signature Speaker Series events. We work with them on a number of fronts with different nonprofit events, and so amazing partners. But part of what she'll be talking about is their variety in terms of all the different organizations they have a chance to work with, from educational institutions, corporate entities, nonprofits. And so she sees events all day, every day, here in the Mid-South, around the world. And so when you talk about events and creating successful fundraising events, there's no one better that I can think of than Dusky Norsworthy. And so Dusky, go ahead and take it away. We'll kick it off and then we'll bring on our panelists in just a little bit. But thank you everyone for joining us again. Dusky, it's all yours.
Thank you, Jeremy. I appreciate it. Behind the Scenes has had an incredible journey for the last 23 years. And for some of you on this call, I know personally, and several of you I don't know yet. And I hope our paths cross soon. But our experiences have touched in multiple cities, multiple states, and multiple countries. And that global experience has taught us, not only just personally rewarding opportunities, but it's really broadened the depth of how our team thinks about events. When Jeremy and I started talking about today and the work we do with nonprofits, I thought some topics about our company that I'd share that sort of set us up for conversations with the panelists is really about the diversity of our work experience. And what has set us apart is diversity. And when I say diversity, I mean diversity of the clients we serve in those industries. So the diversity of those industries, they all have different language, different expectations, different types of events that constantly keep us on our toes, that make us think differently when approaching their activations. Different industries, when they start into that, their audience makes us think about that. So that diversity of that industry is what I'm talking about with audiences. I kind of lost track of my words there, sorry. That audience perspective is what we have to constantly think about with those industries, which again, we're going to talk about knowing your audience on nonprofits as well. The events we've touched on is diversity of locations. Those locations, again, I talked about as can be, if they're global, can be personally rewarding, but it really makes us sensitive when we think about the cultural differences for those groups or their educational differences of those groups. So when we're talking about nonprofits, I'm going to encourage you in a few minutes that we make sure that we're knowing our audience. And some of that comes into the location as well. The diversity of the budgets of types of events we touch on. We have some clients more than willing to pay for the latest trends, the latest food presentations, the national headliners, But we also have clients with their budgets are so diverse that, you know, they don't want to spend money. They don't want that perception that they spent something that was donated or contributed. So we juggle that diversity of budget. We also have some that want champagne but can't afford the keg at the party. So we get caught in the middle as event planners and how to balance that and making sure that we stay true to what that budget is, but what is that perception of what that audience will think of as well. The last one I talk about diversity of our knowledge bank that we bring to events is just the diversity of our team. Our team is made up of convention center managers, hotel managers, people that come from video production backgrounds, people that come from hospitality, people come from process and operations. So that diversity, we all look at projects through different lenses, which makes us stronger when we're working on projects with you. And so those diverse applications that we think about that we have had the opportunity over the last 23 years lend some credibility and some different thinking that we try to work with when we partner with clients. One of the things Jeremy asked me to touch on was really event trends that we're seeing. And we're going to talk about this again as a panelist, but I'll just kind of tee us up from some conversations that we're seeing. And I'm curious to see those that are joining the webinar today also for your notes and chats. But we're seeing that this is really, well, trends have started changing really pre-COVID, but we've definitely seen it since COVID, that it's not your grandfather's gala anymore. So the types and the ages of the attendees that were attending events a few years ago are not who we're seeing. So just to make sure that we're really activating to that audience, make sure that we know the audience, that we're really not activating events and fundraisers based on what we did pre-COVID or what we did even last year, that we're really using some data to track it. So the event trends we're seeing are that our generations are changing of who's attending those, and that we're seeing more and more nonprofits use some real data as they're trying to plan those. We haven't seen hybrid go away. We have seen more and more events, especially nonprofits, that are not necessarily doing 100% of virtual, but we're seeing many, as Jeremy mentioned earlier, that are really embracing the audiences and the supporters they attracted during COVID with virtual. And so now they're keeping it hybrid so that they don't lose those that have built their brand for that. I meant to point out earlier when I was talking about not our grandfather's gala anymore. One event trend we're seeing is that people want more casual. They want more last minute. They want something that's approachable. And they don't want to necessarily just be entertained. They want to be engaged with the process. They want it interactive and engaging. And they're probably going to post and share about it too, which is good. It's good for us, right? It's good for us on the nonprofit to build that brand. We're seeing more events, especially in the nonprofit world. We've been touching these in corporate and government for a long time, but we're seeing more in the nonprofit world where they're more ADA accessible. So the more considerations for how we touch people who might need special considerations in our event. And yes, it might be dietary, but it also might just be accessibility and hearing, seeing, or participating in the event. We're seeing some nonprofits that are really staying more on brand now. And what I mean by that, we're seeing that they're having to rethink creatively of where they host their fundraisers. And so some are staying right on their property, and they're thinking differently of how they activate fundraisers that don't necessarily go out and rent space, but that they bring their constituents to them, their supporters to them. And that was different because pre-COVID, we were seeing pretty much everyone rented a ballroom and had some type of activation there. But we're seeing trends where people are staying more true to their brand and how they host their fundraisers. Jeremy, I don't know if you want me to go ahead and to get in some challenges and opportunities that we're seeing. I'll go ahead and start on that. Feel free to join in. I know we're going to talk about that as a panelist, but when Jeremy was asking me to speak today, I just wanted to share some of the considerations that we're seeing. And we're seeing these in corporate, in every industry that we touch, but especially in nonprofits that we're not prepared for, and that's cost overruns. The cost overruns are really substantial. Everything is elevated, food, labor, entertainment, rentals. So what we saw for the last 18 months really is that nonprofits used budgets that were pre-COVID, and that's not the world we're working in anymore. And when you think about everything costs more, then the next consideration is staffing. Staffing is a real problem we're seeing. Do the venues have enough staff to cover your event? Can the caterers get enough staff to serve your plated dinner, or should it be a buffet? Can the bartenders keep up with, the service that your bar staff that needs? So all of those, even valet. I mean, we ran into an event where valet couldn't quite keep up with parking cars that night because they didn't have enough people. So the staffing obviously is real for events. Some challenges also, the number of items donated for auctions. I think nonprofits have just maxed out people willing to give, and the coupons, the products. So we're seeing those auction items not be maybe as quality as they were at one time. Maybe the quantity's there, but the quality is not necessarily as high as it was. From attendee perspective, we're seeing that people are wanting to walk up, more last minute ticket sales. They're hesitant to sign up because there's so many other opportunities available to them. And so they kind of wait and see what they might want to do Friday or Saturday night before they advance that ticket or sign up to help you. And the last point I'll touch on is security. For the first time, we're seeing nonprofits really consider what their security methods will be and manners and what processes are in place that night. And those were just some of the things we were not necessarily seeing just a few years ago. Jeremy,
I was taking notes over here, and I'm, even on my end, I think, like the idea of less can be more. And so I want to touch on, and then we'll go ahead and introduce our panelists, a couple of things I think that are important, because obviously we host a lot of events in partnership, obviously, with Dusky and her team. And when you look at security, we hire Phelps Security to be out on patrol. When you look at some of the things that we've had to adjust on our end is the personnel, the cost, working with the catering, working with the AV company to make sure that they have the team members to be able to do all of the scaffolding and everything that needs to take place. And so the considerations now are definitely different than prior in terms of personnel, cost, what's realistic, and managing through that. The other thing, as Dusky alluded to, is like the Great Hall and Conference Center. We were talking with them the other day, and they're already almost fully booked as you start looking into 2024. So events are coming back full force, not just with nonprofits, but schools and everyone else. And so the competition is very high around just your time and what's available for venues too. So there's a lot of things that you have to navigate through now with events, much more so than just what's the decor, what's the atmosphere. It's very much now around, like Dusky was saying, is what's the availability, what's the personnel, can we pull these pieces together, what's the experience, what's the interactive. So that's where I think this conversation is critically important, to be able to make sure that everyone has all of this intel. So let's go ahead and introduce our panelists. Let's start. David Scully, president of Duncan Williams Asset Management. He's also a board member with quite a few nonprofits, but most recently with the Assisi Foundation of Memphis, Inc. as well. And so, David, let's start on your end, and we'll ask each of the panelists to do this, but go ahead and introduce yourself. Give us a little background about your organization. In your case, talk about the different nonprofits that you serve with and your kind of vantage point overall, kind of broadly, with nonprofit events. And then we'll start bringing all these conversation points in. But David Scully, take it away, my friend.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, glad to be here this morning. And I will try and keep it brief. It's going to sound like I serve a million nonprofits. I don't. I just talk about all of them a lot. So Jeremy introduced me. I'm the president of Duncan Williams Asset Management. For the day job, we're an investment firm. We think we occupy a fairly unique space in Memphis, and that our mission statement is to serve our clients and improve our community. And the improve our community piece is something that's really important to us. And so we have partnerships with over 85 nonprofit organizations. We support them in a variety of ways. Sometimes it's financially, sometimes it's man hours, sometimes it's networking, joint marketing. A lot of times it's combinations of those things. So, but it's as a local company, it's something that's really important to us to make sure that we're doing the things we can to support our good nonprofit organizations. Now, personally, I was raised by a professional fundraiser. And so I grew up around the dinner table talking about feasibility studies and legacy giving and those sort of things. So I've got an unofficial in-depth education and fundraising. From a service standpoint, like I said, it's going to feel like I serve on a lot of organizations, and I guess I do. But specifically for fundraising, right now, currently, I serve on the St. Agnes Academy board. I have been previously the development committee chair, and I'm currently serving on the capital campaign committee. We're in the middle of a $20 million campaign. I also serve on the board of the Memphis Botanic Gardens. I'm the vice chair of that board. I'm the development committee chair, and we are in a $5 million capital campaign, which I'm helping with. I serve on the Wolf River Conservancy board, also the vice president of that board, and the development committee chair. And I'm chairing our capital campaign, which is about $70 million. You guys are a bunch of nonprofit folks on the call and people paying attention to what's going on in the state. You probably saw that the governor's proposed budget was approved by the legislation yesterday. And so Wolf River is in there for $10.3 million, which we're very excited about. It's going to help us get really close to having the full funding to finish the Greenway project. I think Jeremy mentioned, maybe did not, I do also serve on the Assisi Foundation board. That one's different, right? It's instead of raising money, we give money away. It's wonderful, right? It's I wish we had more money to give away because we get a lot of really good requests there. But that's in a nutshell, that's it for me as far as nonprofit service.
I love it. Thank you for your service. And it's awesome when you talk about just your commitment to the community. Absolutely amazing. Yours and really your whole team and Duncan Williams and the whole 9 yards. So absolutely amazing. So next up, let's introduce Frances Tortorich. She's Director of Development with the Children's Museum of Memphis. And when you talk about both being on both sides, so hosting events at their facility and then obviously, hosting their own events. And so you get both sides of the coin with Frances. So go ahead and tee up a little bit about your organization and your kind of broad view overall.
Thanks, Jeremy. So the Children's Museum has been around for 30 plus years, inspiring children to explore, imagine, and create. And like Jeremy said, we have event space for nonprofits, for other organizations to come in and host their events. We host our own events. We have a very well-known fundraiser held the first weekend in February each year called Cirque du Mom. This year, we worked with Dusky and with David to host that event. David was our chair with his wife, Michelle. It was fantastic. It's the first time we'd had that event since COVID. So it was a really great reintroduction to the event. And I was even taking notes with Dusky speaking. We saw some of those challenges, the last minute attendees. We saw staffing issues. I'm new to the Children's Museum, but I have event experience across the board. I've done the small, social hours at people's homes. I've done the big, large scale events with upwards of a few hundred people. By far and away, the Children's Museum is just a different beast with its with Cirque du Mom, but it's really fun. So that's my event experience. Yeah.
Nice job. And next up, we have Elizabeth Ennis, Senior Development Manager with the American Cancer Society. They do host a lot of events, large and small. I've had a chance to, on my end, serve in a number of capacities with them as well. And so we know all of these organizations well. But Elizabeth, go ahead and tee up your work with American Cancer Society.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on today as well, Jeremy. The American Cancer Society is one of the longest standing national organizations, and our focus is improving the lives of cancer patients and their families by focusing on advocacy, research, and patient support by making sure we can provide the best possible access to care opportunities and programs for our patients that we work with. Even though we're a national organization and you see us all over the country, we do obviously some very heavy work here in Memphis, and we have a lot of really great resources to help out our local patient families. The biggest thing that we focus on right now is, like you said, we have events all year long. So throughout the year, we have events called Relay for Life, which we're probably most well known for across the nation. And these are events that, take people that have been affected by cancer, honoring loved ones, supporting their friends and family, and just being able to walk around a track or hosting, vendor stations at to raise money. Obviously, we have Make Strides Against Breast Cancer, which is what I focus on throughout the year. It's our biggest event in Memphis, and essentially we are the premier breast cancer walk in October. We do things all year long to lead up to that. We have a campaign called Men Wear Pink now. And then actually next weekend, we are hosting our inaugural Discovery Ball of Memphis, which is our gala event that supports the work that we do at the Memphis Hope Lodge. Quick plug, if you're not familiar with that, that is our free lodging facility for cancer patients traveling into the Memphis area to receive treatment. So do a lot of events all year long, and we love it.
So when we talk about hosting events, like I said, we've got a panel of experts for sure that knows this world very well and the continual evolution that we're all going through. So we will go ahead and open it up. So as you have questions, you can put them in the chat. We'll also have the Q&A feature, so we'll try to monitor both of those. I've got Allison and Andrew on my team as well in the background. They'll help me manage this, but that way you all can interact with your questions. But I want to start with where it starts, really, as Dusky alluded to on the front end now, using a lot of data to figure out, okay, what does our audience look like? What do they want? What are those changing needs? Do they want the black tie and the more formal? Do they want it to be casual? Are we gearing toward an older audience, a younger audience, all ages? We spent, when you talk about events, a lot of money on bands that when the band plays, everyone leaves. And so it's like really understanding your audience so that you can create the efficiency is very important. And so I'm going to start out, we'll go kind of through, but Dusky, let's start with you. When you're sitting down with a nonprofit and you're saying, okay, let's go through the data. Let's understand our audience. What are the questions and the things that you're looking for to understand your audience to figure out, is this an event we need to keep? Because sometimes those can be, it can either be put on hold or go ahead and put them out to the pasture for a little bit, or do we need to bring something new? But talk about on your end the things that you're looking at to understand an audience.
Jeremy, when I start with someone, it's sort of a delicate spot to be in. People often have brought us in as an event planner, and they expect in some ways for us to contribute, in some ways to be an order taker. And some of our clients really, they've either been told what they need to do, or they have in their own mind what they feel like they need to do. And so it's trying to be that delicate balance to really to get them to understand that we want to be a collaborative partner with them. And so it may sound like we're challenging and we're pushing back, but it's to get them to rethink and to think of it from a different perspective. And I was trying to touch on it earlier and kind of got a little nervous in there in the beginning and was talking about some of the things of our experiences that have led us to where we are as a company. And so it's being able to push back to ask that. So how did you come up with that? How did you extrapolate that? Do you really know that audience? And trying to ask them those questions. So what we want to try to find out is, are they surveying them? Did they use any electronic method last year that we can look at to try to understand what their audience is? And sometimes the contact that we're working with, they've been so in the weeds in producing their event, they don't even have their own observations of what happened. So using your example about the band, they might have said, well, we've always had a band. But perhaps they were so celebrating at the end, they're dancing themselves on the dance floor and don't realize there's really not a bigger crowd. So literally by having someone else that we can talk through that to find out, is it real data? Is it observed data? And how we, can get to the conclusion, is this just their opinion? Is this something they've been mandated to try to do? And it's talking through that. And it's taking that data and then deciding, is it worth us spending the money on doing? If we don't really know, and we think, using your analogy about the band, if we think everyone used the band, then let's make sure that that's a focal point we're going to really watch this year on our group and see how they use and interact with that and participate.
One of the things that I see a lot on the boards that I'm on and the committees and such is understanding even the different nuances and the audiences that come to an event and why they come to an event. And so you have your committees and your supporters, your avid mission supporters, and so they're going to show up and they're going to come full force. You have corporate supporters, which are your sponsors, who might not be attached to the mission, but they're coming really to meet people. They're coming for networking. They're coming for an ROI, and that's the lens they're viewing. And so while they do want the experience and the interaction, they want to meet people. And sometimes the one that writes the check in terms of the communications of the CEO, that division, isn't necessarily the ones being sent. And so being mindful of the corporate support and what they want out. And then you have others that just are showing up for a good time. And so once again, they might or might not have an attachment to the mission. So even understanding those different dynamics helps you kind of create special moments for each one of them so that you're checking off all those boxes. David, touch on that, because I know that's something when you talk about efficiency, effectiveness, as you mentioned, growing up in a world of fundraising, this is in your wheelhouse. Share a little bit of when you look at the audience in that front end, the planning stage, what are the things you're focused on?
Right. So efficiency is really important in event planning. I've seen many organizations, start with a committee and you have volunteers and you love your volunteers and they start talking about new ideas, right? You have the things that you've always done. They're like, oh, but my church does this and my kid's school does that. And have you ever thought of a golf tournament? What about an online auction? What if we did this and this and this? They start throwing a million things at you. And so if you try to do them all, you're going to have a bunch of like really mediocre things and then maybe don't even work. But worse than that, you're wasting time, right? And so the most effective fundraising events are really efficient, right? Imagine a scenario where one of your volunteers talks you into a golf tournament. There's a lot of golf tournaments, but you're going to do a little bit different. And so you start working and you get your whole team working and all of a sudden you're putting in hundreds of hours and planning this golf tournament and trying to get sponsors, and maybe it's working and try and get teams, or we're going to have one flight or two. And so you do all this work, you spend a total of like 400 hours planning a golf tournament and run the day of, and you net $10,000, right? You would have been better off spending a weekend standing at the corner of Ridgeway and Poplar with a hat, right? It's that's not an efficient thing. And so efficient doesn't necessarily mean big. It just means that the amount of funds that you're going to net appropriately reflect the amount of effort and resources it took to get them. And so you just really want to be intentional about taking just a handful of things and doing them really well and really efficient, not wasting time, not wasting resources, and doing it right.
Francis, let's bounce to you, because I know that that's something you pay very close attention to, is the goals, the objective. Is it friends raising and trying to raise awareness and get more people attached to the mission? Is it fundraising? So knowing the audience, knowing the goal, being efficient is in your wheelhouse for sure. Talk about it from that lens on your end.
Yeah, so I feel like I take a really unique approach in that I'm not just looking at who's coming to the specific event, right? As a museum, we have people who walk in our doors every single day of the year. And so what I'm trying to think about too is who's walking in our door, or who hasn't walked in our door yet that needs to be walking in our door. Who can we bring in through this event? Maybe it is that corporate sponsor who is sending their whole marketing team, but maybe that marketing team didn't know that there was a children's museum in Memphis, that it's the only one for 200-mile radius. So how can we bring those folks in? How can we bring in the folks who maybe don't have children and don't know that there's this resource, this educational absolute asset for the community sitting right here in their backyard, because they don't have children, because they aren't coming on, every Sunday. And then who are the people who are coming every Sunday and have a great time with their kids, but who just really want to have a great time riding the carousel by themselves, right? So I take a look at it as, who are those constituencies that we haven't yet reached, that we want to reach? Can we bring in teachers? Can we bring in other nonprofits who are serving children in Memphis? And I've always taken that approach of thinking about who needs to be exposed to our mission in that quick hour or two that we might not otherwise reach. So I really like events in that aspect of that. It can be fundraising, and at the end of the day, it's about that much longer term relationship with them, and that it might be fundraising that night, but maybe you have a long-term volunteer, maybe you have a teacher who's going to bring their classroom every year after that. So I think that they have a really important role to play in the long-term pipeline of your donors and your constituents.
And I think that is a key when you talk about planning on the front end, knowing the audience, but just like you're talking about, what are the objectives outside of a financial goal? What are the objectives? How many of them can you recruit to volunteer? How many of you can you put on the newsletter? So I think all of those things become very important goals on the front end so that you know what you're working for. So Elizabeth, touch on that same thing when you talk about the planning, the data, looking at all those types of things to help inform the decisions. What does that look like in your world?
Well, especially any fundraising professional knows that you have to recruit the right people. And whether it's for your board, whether it's for your volunteer committee, you have to sit down and have conversations with people and say, okay, let's look at your skill set. Let's look at the skill sets that we have in front of us. Are you somebody that can be a great day of volunteer? Are someone that can go out and help make asks for sponsorship, or recruit teams, or just bring people to the event? And as fundraising professionals, again, we all know that finding those right people helps make our job that much easier. And if you can build those relationships and kind of plug and play where you see people best fit, it makes things that much smoother. It makes bringing more people to the table, because if somebody loves their role and what they do with your organization, whether it is volunteering on day of, whether it is serving in a board role, they're more likely to share with their network, hey, this has been my experience. This is what I get out of it. Come be a part of this as well. And it just expands on from there. So, really focusing in and building the relationships, building the right relationships obviously plays a huge role in any type of event, making that successful.
Yeah. I want to come back because we'll spend a good amount of time talking about the interaction with the volunteers, the staff, how to get the most out of those moments. But I want to touch on one with Christy. And I also want to kind of weave in, I think, which is a trend, but it's a really good one, back to Dusky's main point about sometimes less is more. I think we get trapped sometimes into thinking bigger and better. But in reality, I'm seeing a lot of them where it's just board members and individuals inviting people over to their house, much more intimate experience, much more personal relationship and the ask, getting to know the nonprofit, but also the financial. And, you get the right people in that room, those numbers can be big, and it's a very small, intimate, exclusive experience versus the big one. So I think there are a lot of cool things that are happening as a part of that. So Christy's question, Christy Gilmore, appreciate the panel. I'd like to address timing of events. What are we seeing with scheduling events, evening events earlier, given people's changing habits of being in their PJs by 9 p.m. So the question is around, where do you fall? And this is a planning question, is around like evening events, timing of evening events. Should it be an evening event after hours versus, a weekend? Because I do think that this is something that has changed even very recently, because I'm just now seeing that after work events are starting to pop again. Whereas before, with everybody working from home, if it was like a Monday through Thursday after work thing, people are like, I just don't want to go. So the attrition levels were super high, but I'm just now seeing those pop back up. So I'm curious, free choice, let's go Dusky first. What are you factoring in with the changing schedules? When do you host events? When do you like to be done? Weekend versus weekday? What are your thoughts?
Great question. Yes, we're definitely seeing that people want to be home earlier. So we're seeing a trend that there's a surge for people coming earlier, getting to that cocktail hour. And then you start the events, even if they're planned to 11 o'clock or later, we're still seeing people start dropping back off. So I think you can definitely save money. And I encourage you to think about that you're paying for your bar, your staffing and everything for a certain amount of hours. So knowing that you're probably going to have some fall off of how our patterns of life have changed, is consider closing that earlier is saving you money. So yeah, we're seeing that surge earlier and then going home earlier.
Yeah, I've been surprised on all, because we've been attending a lot of events. I mean, I've literally 2 or 3 a day at this point right now. And so every one of them though is done early. So I mean, I'm at home by 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, which before you'd be done at like 11. So, I mean, everybody literally like, all right, it's time to go.
Hey,
Elizabeth, go ahead.
I was just going to say one thing about that is with the surge of events, I just encourage you to really start checking your calendars, whomever you're working with and your planning team, to see what you're up against, because your decline in participation is directly impacted by whatever's already scheduled. I see Ken Hall putting in there about all events being in April and October. So true. But we've seen events scheduled on the night of a Tigers football game, which impacted attendance, or there was something really large taking place at the University of Memphis that was scheduled. So again, knowing your audience, but doing your research now that so many events are back happening. Sorry to jump in there on you.
Yeah, no, and that's a very important question. We were talking the other day about kind of scheduling of events. And for us, when you look at it, and it's true for nonprofits and events too, when you look at the biggest concentration, mid to late January, February's good, early March, later March, April, early May. So you're out of Memphis in May. But then, summer, that can be good or bad depending on nonprofit. And then you get into the fall, but that's a busy season for school and football and sports and everything else. And so, you're always going to be up against competition. It's just a matter of doing your due diligence to realize, you look at May 4th as a perfect example. There's like 30 events going on that day that we're trying to figure out how do we manage. And so it's a lot of competition you just need to be ahead of to know what you're getting into. Francis, what are your thoughts on timing and such?
Yeah, so we are in a unique position, right? We serve primarily children and families. So Start to See Mom is our only evening event. And it's one that even this year, we saw that trend of early. We had only a few stragglers after 11 o'clock this year. And so in thinking about what are some of these other ways we can engage and do a few more events, I'm thinking about breakfast and lunch. What are these things that accommodate children and families so that, you're not having to stress out about a babysitter or what have you in the after evening hours. I think too, also trying to think about, can we leverage some of those early cocktail hours so that you're not paying the babysitter the full 5 hours, things like that. So just trying to be mindful. Again, it goes back to knowing your audience, right? Knowing that you're probably having people with children attend your event. And so they are thinking about babysitter. They're thinking about grandma and grandpa being at home with baby and children. So I think that piece is so important. And again, it just goes back to knowing your audience and knowing what else they have going on outside of your event.
Yeah. Elizabeth, what would you add?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, there are certain months, especially in Memphis, that you just kind of know to stay away from, just due to the volume of other things happening throughout the city. For us, we this will be our 23rd year for Making Strides, and for years we had it on a Saturday morning because that's just what you do for a 5K, right? And ours is a little bit different because it's an awareness walk versus a timed 5K. So we ended up moving our event to a Sunday afternoon, after church, before the later church crowd on Sunday, or before youth time. And so being able to, again, cater to our audience. What are our participants want to see? What can they do to make it work? We don't want to compete with football, especially not SEC football or anything around the South. So we know that we've got to find a date and time that works best. And again, for us too, we've noticed that people working from home, or even if they are going back into their offices, their work days tend to be maybe a little bit shorter. So people that would get off at 5 o'clock maybe are getting off at 4:30 now. Or so we've kind of, again, moved things up a little bit and said, okay, we're going to set this for this time. Also we've looked at, okay, in the past, this may have been a 3-hour event. How can we crunch that down into a 1.5-hour event to make sure that when we get people there, we keep their attention the entire time and keep them focused on, what we're trying to share out in our mission, and then send them on their way from there. So.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I was on a meeting the other day, and we were talking about events and how we look at them as a show. Like, it's not just an event, it's the energy, it's the music, it's like all the little details that make it a show, because people's attention span is very short now, and you have to be aware of that. That's a trend in of itself. Now, that's something that's a long time been there, but I think our attention spans keep getting shorter and shorter and shorter because of social media and everything else, and you have to be cognizant of that. I want to touch on this one, and then we'll start weaving in some of the things I know that David wanted to touch on as well in terms of the staff and the operational efficiency piece of it, diving deeper there. How do you estimate attendance with the trend towards people making last-minute decisions? That's a tough one, and so Dusky, we'll throw this to you as a starting point. We'll throw you the hard, question right out of the gate. But I also think it's that, but it's also too, and once again, I'll say this is an ever-evolving conversation. Normally, attrition rates for events in terms of people signing up and not showing up would be, on average 12 to 20%. We were seeing coming out of the pandemic 50 to 60%. And going to a lot of the nonprofits events, the average was 500 before pandemic, and then 250 in the room, and people pulling their hair out thinking we planned for 500, and then they just don't show up. And it is a real issue with people signing up for a lot of things and not showing up and not letting you know when you're buying the food and the drinks and everything else for it. It's a real problem with nonprofits and with corporate, events. And I think I am, good news, seeing that those numbers are starting to come back down, that people are now legitimately showing up. Now we still have an issue of them, not showing up and not letting you know, but those numbers are going down. So I think the good news is that the attrition rates are getting lower back to what was normal. Still high, but back to what's normal. So all of this is a good thing. Dusky, how do you though estimate attendance with the trends toward people making last minute decisions?
It's just really an educated guess. And so I guess as an event planner, what I'm trying to do is advise our clients we're minimizing risk. So we're going to take some educated formulas. We're going to try to minimize. We're going to try to forecast, because we don't want people showing up that we don't have food and alcohol for, but then we're going to try to minimize that risk. And what I mean by that is, so maybe we're not going to do a plated dinner, we're going to do buffet. So that allows us to be intentional with who we can donate that food for, and having some resources so that then it's just not a disposed waste. Perhaps we're really partnering with companies that say if that's not opened, we can return it. If that's not used, we can, get a refund on that. So just really thinking through all our aspects. It goes back also to minimizing that time. So we've minimized our risk and labor calls for who we have there, for caterers or staffing, that can also minimize those investments. So just really trying to rethink. And when it comes down to it right now, we are seeing such a decline in people responding. They're taking complimentary tickets that are given away by sponsors, and maybe they don't have any skin in the game, so they don't see a responsibility at going. Or we're also dealing, unfortunately, with a generation that doesn't know how to RSVP. They don't understand the impact of not showing up or not letting you know they're coming, that cost you. They don't mean to hit your bottom line, but they are. So it's just a generation that we're seeing that just doesn't understand that impact on the RSVP. So I would say right now it's just minimizing that risk, since we don't know on some of those trends.
And we're trying really hard on our end to keep pushing. So we'll send way more follow-up emails now saying, please, if you're not coming, let us know. We're trying to do the best with these events. You're holding up seats that could be for someone else who would enjoy going. So the communication lines play a very important role. I'll just throw it out generally to the other panelists. What would you add to that in terms of, how do you manage through kind of that uncertainty?
Yeah, I would say first, Dusky mentioned skin in the game, but specifically, like, if you can get people to pay something, even if it's low, even if it's $5, $10, but they've paid for it, you're gonna have a really high chance. And that's not right for every event, right? You do stuff for free, or the company's paid and the people don't feel skin in the game. I ain't a perfect solution, but having, instead of free events, really low cost attendance, just to where they've had to put in their credit card, it's the Outlook thing, it's been saved to their calendar automatically. That maybe can help some. I will tell anecdotally, right, it impacts at least 3 of us on the call. So Cirque du Soleil coming out of COVID, right? We hadn't had it in 3 years. Previously, the event would have around 1,000 people, like kind of between 800 and 1,100. And so when we initially started having our meetings back in like August, that's what we're planning for. And so as we get closer, the ticket sales just aren't really there. We're getting kind of behind where they'd been in the past. And so we're saying, what's going on? Well, they had the Shite music thing at the University of Memphis was the same night. And I think we had a Tigers game that day, but it was an early game. And so, and there was something, it was like Wine for Wishes, I think, was the Friday right before it. And so we took a big chunk of crowd and went out Friday night, maybe wanted to double up on that weekend. So thankfully, we had Dusky working with us. And so we were able to shift the event a little bit, where we truncated it, where you guys, I'm sure everybody's been to the Children's Museum. You come in the event entrance in the back, and normally Cirque du Soleil snakes all the way through the whole thing. But we truncated it, right? So we cut it off right at the skyscraper. We had a DJ in there, but you couldn't go past that. And then it would go back to the carousel and the big ballroom. And so we ended up with around 500 people, maybe 550, somewhere in that range, but it felt really full, right? Versus, if we had 550 people spread out over a space for 1,000, it would have felt empty. Like, it still would have been a success from a fundraising standpoint, but like people would be like, where is everybody, right? And so having the ability to make those shifts. Now you got to have a deadline on there, right? You got to, it's not something you can do day of. You got a couple weeks out or a month out. You got to say, look, we're not going to have the attendance. We got to make some changes, right? We don't need as much food. We don't need as much space. We don't need as many headsets for the silent disco or whatever. And we're able to do all those things with really nice guidance from a good event planner. But yeah, you got to be able to make those adjustments.
Yeah, that's
Definitely.
great insight. Yep.
Yeah, I was just going to add too, thinking back to Dusky's original point of looking at these budgets and your attendance pre-COVID, you also need to consider how the world has changed. So, again, we were planning on pre-COVID numbers. We hadn't had this event in 3 years. And so shifting back to the expectations of, just the way that people have responded to these large scale events, I think was so important as we kind of considered and planned and constantly checked in to see where ticket sales were, what else we could do to drive that up. But, at the end of the day, Memphis is great because there are so many events. And then in a planning sense, Memphis is terrible because there are so many events that you have to be aware of and be cognizant of and where your audience is going. So it was a challenge.
Well, one last thing on the CERC thing. We had a really nice pivot. Like we got about a month out and ticket sales were still kind of low. And our ticket for that was $125. And so you get a married couple that's got a couple kids and they're $250 just to get in the door, but they got to pay the babysitter too. And so you're looking at like a $350 evening. And so a lot of people maybe that's not a big deal, but many more where that is. And so one thing that we offered was a promotional code, right? When you log in for teachers, because they felt like on mission with education of children. Also, just generally nonprofit employees and people that were working in the healthcare industry. And so any of those folks that logged in and used the promotional code got a $50 ticket. And so they're, the couple's paying $100 now for something that's a $250, $300 experience. But for us, all of our costs are sunk at that point. And so the next person that walks in the door, all they cost us is what they consume from an alcohol standpoint, because we're taking back everything we don't use. And so, do the math on what the average person is drinking when we have the alcohol donated, double donation from Athens and Buster's at cost. It's, every time somebody walks in the door, they cost us $11, $18, but they're paying $50. That still makes sense for us. So it was something we were able to do and people felt good about and then boosted our numbers.
Yeah, I think, Francis kind of brought it up in each one of his, mentioning it in a way too, is we've had to really reframe what success looks like pre-pandemic versus where we are now. So that way, psychologically, you can look at things a little differently, but also realize, okay, success now does look different than what it did before. And also being mindful and each one of them has kind of alluded to the psychological piece of this. The bigger events are just now coming back in terms of you feeling comfortable being in a big room with a lot of people. And so we've had to very, cautiously think through how do we space out? How do we what is the appropriate number, not just to get more people out, but to be mindful of where people are psychologically. So I feel like things once again now are much different, even within the last 30 to 60 days versus prior. But these are all things that you have to think about on the front end. And I want to highlight some of the stuff that's coming through because I think these are good points too. Ernie from the Assisi Foundation of Memphis, Inc. Thank you again for your support. Put on a lot of free events. We get frustrated when we've ordered lunch for 500 and you have 100 no-shows. It's wasteful and makes us want to rethink providing lunch. And that's what we're up against. And so the point is, if you've never been in charge of an event, you don't realize how important that is. And so the respect around RSVPing is so critically important and the professionalism around that as well. And I think that is something that we need to be better role models of for the next generation, is understanding the importance. Christy's pointing out New Memphis has a reception coming up. Instead of no cost, they're charging $7. So kind of back to David's point about coming in with some skin in the game. And then let's see, here we go. Here's a question coming in. We'll touch on this and then we'll dive into the volunteer side. What are the best citywide calendar resources to know what's happening in the city ahead of time? Choose 901, is there a better space? And so, kind of back to how do we avoid all the competitive issues? Where do you all look? I mean, obviously holidays, Choose 901 has some, on the CVB side. There's a lot of other ones though. You just kind of have to know, we look at football schedules between Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Memphis, you have to kind of regionally look too. But what are some of the factors that you all look, or where do you go to find out just what's free time?
A lot of times we, Choose 901 is a great resource and we look there. I Love Memphis blog, they post some things. The Greater Memphis Chamber typically has updated events. cityCURRENT has usually updated events. So, checking all those, but like you said, it's not just a local look, it's a regional look as well, to see what's going on. And then if you notice, Lizzo thought she was performing in a few weeks and now has to move her date for the Grizzlies. So, you're not always going to get everything, but you can try.
Yeah, it's just like you're never going to get it perfect on that. You just got to do your best with the date that makes sense for your organization. But like I've seen with Live at the Garden, right? Like they negotiate with the bands that can come in on what dates they have available, and like they don't like they can't check and see what else is going on June 2nd. And so if they schedule a concert for the same night that Junior Achievement's having something that we at Duncan Williams are sponsoring, I got to try to be two places at once, right? It's just what's going to be. I'm a terrible person to ask on this. My wife and I have been married for 12 years this month. And I remember when we got engaged, we're trying to figure out like, when should we get married? Same sort of, it's a big event. It's the biggest event we've ever had, right? We're planning an event. And I was like, well, we wanted to do it kind of in April because, it's Memphis, April, or October, right? And so I was like, well, March Madness is that, like the Final Four is that first Saturday in April. And then the draft, like later in April, the basketball NBA playoffs start and the NFL draft. And like, we have a barbecue fest team. All my out of town friends are coming back in May. So we don't want to get too close to May. I was like, that second weekend in April, I think it's good. I think it's good. It's a Masters weekend. And I went to the University of Georgia. I got a bunch of friends that are from Augusta and have Masters tickets. They're still pissed about it. It's just what it's going to be.
And sometimes, Jeremy, no matter how much planning and calendar searching and thought you've put into choosing that event, someone with maybe more a larger audience books theirs after you, which is a pull from you. So sometimes, no matter what work you've done, something else bigger comes in.
The key on that too is just reaching out to who's your big sponsors, who are the board members, making sure it's clear on their date, because that's really the biggest key. Is if you can get the right people to go ahead and be able to commit, that's part of it too.
Absolutely. I mean, our physical location is dictated by our events. I mean, Start to See Mom is always that first weekend in February, but we are literally neighboring the Simmons Bank Stadium. And now we've got all this other exciting development going on right next door. We've got CBU across the street. So we have to be mindful just of our physical location and what else is going on. And sometimes that's great. And other times it is not great. But if you're thinking about hosting an event somewhere that's not your physical location, be mindful of what are the other big players that are around you, because that might have to shift what goes on with you. And again, sometimes it might be a Lizzo situation where, all of a sudden we've got a playoff and things shift and change so much in the city. And that's what happened with us this year with Start to See Mom. I think it was the ice storm maybe that knocked the U of M's event back onto our day. And so we weren't even thinking about it until a couple months out that, oh no, we've got this other competing event. But I will say the other calendar that I like to look at is the Arts Memphis event calendar. They have all of the arts and programming going on in the city, and that's a great resource for us.
Yeah, very good. Let's switch gears and let's talk about the volunteer side, because each of you have a different perspective on how do we engage volunteers? How do you, as David kind of alluded to on the front end, figure out the best use of time for staff members? And so, Dusky, let's start on your end and we'll kind of work our way through, but share a little bit about how you encourage the volunteer management side and get the most effective use out of your volunteers, as well as for the nonprofit, the staff, and that powerful interchange.
Sure. We actually started this working with a lot of corporations that wanted their employees to be forward facing. That I had to start thinking about how to give you a list to that company or to the nonprofit of what those workers need to be doing. So you're really doing intentional placement of where you need their skill set. So I can literally help craft out a list that says we need this many people that are extremely extroverts. They're going to be personal. They're going to be forward facing. They're going to be your great greeters. And this is their role, really defining what lane they need to swim in so that you do it, and then breaking it down into small chunks of time so that you need them there 30 minutes or 1 hour. So everyone gets to enjoy the evening as a volunteer, but they know when they're expected to play there. But then there's some volunteers where you need people counting money or checking people in or bussing tables or loading in the auction or something like that. So not just allowing people to serve maybe wherever they want to jump and serve, but really focusing on how many people you need so that we don't get caught up in small chatter and we get the job done, but that you're using their skill sets best. So by literally saying you need this many people of this type, you need this many people that can do this, then you're allowing and setting up, say, the Elizabeth in the situation that she can go and say, okay, I'm filling this many slots of volunteers today. And then our team often steps up as a third party. So, our nonprofits are all about building those relationships. But sometimes if someone like ourselves is introduced to say, our event planner will coach you on your job to do today. So it's easier for those instructions to come from me to say, this is what we need you doing, and this is what we expect you to do. And this is when you would step back and turn it over to someone else. And then lastly, I'll say about those volunteers is making sure, circling back to that role of security that we play today, that they know those protocols that are going to be put in place if, heaven forbid, something went wrong, that we're all on one page. And I'll often say, I want you to make sure you know who I am. If I come up to you tonight, I need you to do something for me. So it's just clear communication and utilizing those volunteers and their best skill sets so they're comfortable, minimizing the amount of time. So you're not asking them to work for 6 hours. You're keeping them focused. They can enjoy the evening and be with their spouse. But then they do know if there's something an emergency that they need to step up, what role they play.
Yeah. David, let's go ahead and transition to you, buddy.
Yeah, from a volunteer standpoint, I just think you want to match the event with the group that you might ask to come in and volunteer, right? So if you're setting up a 5K, maybe go get the high school football team to throw out cones and hand out water, right? If you're doing the plant sale at the Botanic Garden, maybe go talk to the ladies in the little garden club to come help you with the plant sale, right? If you're doing an evening event and you need people, helping, instructing folks on how they check out on the silent auction, then maybe you work with the Coyotes at CBU, right? I mean, it's you want to make sure that you get the right group, the right ask. You got a lot of different organizations that are looking for volunteer opportunities, and just being able to make those connections and provide them actually the opportunity that's going to help them fulfill something that they want.
Touch a little bit, David, on your end. Dive a little deeper on the front end with setting up the event committee. So when you look at a successful event committee, and this will transition over to Elizabeth and Francis, but talk about how you go about setting up the right group on the front end to be the host for the event.
Yeah. So, I'll talk about the committee, but also the board, right? The strength of any organization, strength of its board. You want to be very intentional about the way you recruit your board. Seen a million organizations that are just kind of like, hey, we need a new board member. Anybody know somebody? I'm like, yeah, my neighbor would be a good guy. And they're like, okay, tell him he's on. Like, you need way more intentionality than that, right? You want to give people a chance to first demonstrate passion for the organization, whether it's giving, whether it's through time that they volunteer. Maybe they serve on a committee for a year or two before they ultimately end up joining the board, so they totally understand what the commitments are, what the expectations are for giving and support and attendance and all those sorts of things. But on the event committee specifically, what I'm typically looking for is people that are have strong networks, that are extroverted and willing to ask for money, right? Because I usually, the events that I find are most successful, the actual event planning, I want to leave to an event planner and staff, people that have worked on this event, 12 times over the last 12 years, and someone that's a professional that knows like how the flow should be and whatever. Like, you can let your committee have some input on, what our theme is going to be, or, do you care if there's a signature drink? Sure, right? Like, decide that. But really what I want is people that are going to help us have a successful financial event. And so, the people, the more connections they have and the earlier you start, go out to all the organizations that support things in Memphis and ask them to support this thing. Don't do it the day before, do it 6 months before and give them a chance to put it in their budget and plan for it effectively. And so, there's no mission without money. Right. We have fun at these events, but what we're really trying to do is to help sustain the organization and be able to support their mission. So I want a committee, like, pull board members down to the committee, pull other community volunteers up to the committee, people that have demonstrated that they care about it, whether they've had giving, consistency of giving. Maybe somebody's just giving you $50 every year, but they've done it for 20 years. That's the person that cares about you. Right. So grab those folks, leverage their networks. You want to know, where do your board members work? Where do their spouses work? Are those organizations that support? Who has really go get a bunch of salespeople, right? Like go get someone that is in sales for the bank and sales for an investment firm and sales for whatever, because then they know a million different decision makers at all these different companies in town. But that's when I'm putting a committee together, I want people that are comfortable asking for money and know a ton of people that they are able to ask for money.
Yeah, because I mean, you've got to sell tickets, and to your point, the mission is to raise the money. I mean, obviously, it's to raise awareness and exposure, and back to the friends raising, but it's also too you're there for financial, giving to be able to support the nonprofit. And I do think that is a critical piece of the equation, because if you have a high turnover and the committee isn't, you don't have the institutional piece and you're constantly having to, pull those pieces together, that's valuable time to be able to execute on the event. If you don't get ahead of it, if you don't have the right people, and to your point, if you don't have the people that are willing to leverage their network, in many cases, they go after like a big dollar amount in terms of like that individual, but they don't necessarily have the ability to invite a lot of people or really raise the money. And so you want people who are actively going to be involved in that whole process. So Francis, let's go to you and then we'll go to Elizabeth. But what are your thoughts around the committees, the board, engaging them with your team, that intersection? Go ahead and dive in.
Yeah, I mean, from a staff standpoint, it's really communicating. Just like Dusky said, you have to communicate with your volunteers because they are just that. They're volunteers. They're not getting paid. They're not spending 40 hours a week on this. And so anything the staff can do to support that, right? Sending the language. cityCURRENT did a fabulous job giving me all the language to be on this panel today, because you understand that I have all of these other things going on, both personally and professionally. And so I think what the best thing you can do is communicate about what the role is. And so nobody walks in surprised that, oh, I should have worn tennis shoes, not high heels to this event. I think making sure that even something as simple as that, but making sure that they know, hey, you're going to be expected to move a table, or you're going to need to know how to use Excel. I think those things are so critical. And I'm seeing some excitement for Volunteer Odyssey. And the thing I love about that is that you're required to put in a job description on that. And so even if it's just one sentence about what somebody's expected to do, I think that that's critical. And then I think, again, leveraging the board and your volunteers, especially at the high committee level, again, just setting them up for success, giving them, the resources, knowing, hey, this sponsor has gone on for 10, 15 years. And so they're very likely to renew again, or, this person's never donated before, but you know what, if you have a great relationship with them, let's try it. And so having that institutional knowledge, bringing that to your volunteers, I think is super helpful as well.
Before we switch over to Elizabeth, you brought up a great point that I think is a huge piece of event success: attire.
Yes.
Like you're seeing a lot more now, like not for the volunteers, absolutely, because it's like there's a huge difference in terms of what you wear and your comfort level and, on brand and everything else too. But for events, like I'm literally seeing, instead of the, fashion forward cocktail attire, like all these kind of weird things where like, what does that mean? It's guys, no tie, wear a sport coat and jeans. Ladies, you can wear so very upfront on like, here's exactly what you can wear to fit in. And I think that's awesome. Elizabeth, go ahead.
Well, just kind of to speak on that real quick, our gala this coming weekend is black tie attire. And we've had a lot of questions of what does that still mean? And so, it's 2023, black tie attire we would like you to show up in a tuxedo if you want to show up in a tuxedo, but that's not necessarily what it means to everybody, so long dresses, short dresses, things like that. So it's funny you brought that up. But as far as volunteers goes and engaging the board and whatnot, kind of on the volunteer piece, the big thing is you want to meet volunteers where they are too, so if you have pieces that you are planning out that you can take to volunteers. One example is we've worked with Methodist, and we've had things that need to be done, programs folded, bags sorted or put together, things like that. But we don't necessarily have the space for them to come in and do it in our office. We take it to them, let them volunteer at their workplace, and then bring it back to us. And you kind of have knocked out those different pieces leading up to your event. And that's helped us really well. But speaking on the engagement of the board, Francis and David had really, really great points about communications and expectations and really setting folks up for success. If you can provide them with all the materials and all the resources leading into it, then there should be no question day of. But one of the things obviously is, and we all know, is stewardship and making sure that when those volunteers do show up and do go out and make those asks that's outside of their comfort zone, or connect us with folks that they wouldn't normally be asking favors from, that we show our appreciation and show that we want them to come back next year, and maybe invite other people that again might have the same similarities or same kind of passion for things, and bring them on. So stewardship is a really big piece of it, and the expectation, communication, and making sure that, again, once you get to that event, there's no question as to who's doing what this looks like, where people should be. It's all laid out for them.
Yeah. Let's talk about technology. I think, as Dusky mentioned on the front end, you have the virtual events that were going on through the pandemic, a lot of creativity and innovation there. Now we're in a hybrid role where you do have a lot, and quite a few nonprofits ended up with a national, or at least an out of the region support group, because they started hosting the virtual events that went above and beyond their geographical area. And so they don't want to lose that connection. And so, we're a perfect example of that, where now our audience with cityCURRENT really is global. And so the hybrid events have been a huge success. And so talk about the technology there, but I think technology plays even more of an important role now. Digital check-in, online auction, online live auction, which has been interesting to see. So technology is playing a really important role, and even obviously with the marketing, social media, leveraging that ahead of time, hashtags before, during, after the event, the videos and getting the content there and pictures. So technology really has become instrumental in the success of events. Dusky, let's start with you once again. Talk about technology. You can go broad, you can go micro, whichever way, but talk tech.
Yeah, talk tech. So it is fascinating to see, once again, elements we've been doing for years in corporate events roll into nonprofits now. It was difficult for some nonprofits to bite the bullet, so to speak, and invest in electronic check-in. They were like, oh no, we can have 10 volunteers sit on a table and mark off names. Like, yes, and people can stand in line for a very long time, and their first experience is not going to be pleasant. But when you can meet them with an iPad and a phone and check them in quickly, it gets them in the room, that you get a drink in their hand, they get to see their friends, and they move along faster. The other element it does, it literally verifies who's in that room. So back to a security standpoint, back to a continuing marketing standpoint. So you're not just collecting paper tickets or marking off names, but you have a chance quickly to enter that Jeremy Park was there, not Johnny Pitts. So if you took those tickets, so we're able to really adapt quicker on the fly for that. And then, yes, obviously the hashtags to promote, so that you're pushing your branding out for your event, the promoting it for selling tickets and creating awareness that we're seeing so much more of. All of these elements we've been touching in corporate events for a very long time, but it's so nice to see these rolling into nonprofits. One, the technology's gotten more affordable, so it's more realistic to share with people with smaller budgets that are a little more challenged there. But it's worth your spend for acquiring some of this information. The last part was fun seeing is how much fun you can push out with the photos taken at those events to push out of how good it was for building the audience for next year.
Absolutely. And all of those get to be put into your email, your newsletter list and all that. So the technology really you've been able to leverage on a lot of fronts. David, go ahead and talk about tech on your end.
Sure, yeah, it's been nice because it's actually forced organizations to evolve, right? If you're still, checking people in with pen and paper, and they come in and you have physically all of your silent auction items are sitting on the tables with like a write your name down bidding process, that's a disaster. And checkout sucks. I mean, it's you can't do that anymore. It's just like people are going to hate it. They're not going to come back next year, right? And so I remember with Wolf River Conservancy, when I first got involved like 9 years ago, our gala was outdoors, and we were getting eaten by mosquitoes, and we net like $5,000 and kind of high-fived each other and said, we'll be back next year. And last year we had our event at the Children's Museum. Dusky ran the event for us. Check-in was super easy. We moved all of our auction stuff online. We used to have a live auction. We dropped that, and we just did the raise the paddle for a fund to need. We did a afterward check-in with Dusky on what we should do, and this is maybe the one we were talking about earlier. We might be dropping the band altogether because nobody's dancing. We're talking about next year maybe shifting over to like a a musical pairing where we've got something small during cocktail hour, something small while dinner's being served, and something small, for if anybody wants to hang around for an after party. But the technology's been tremendous, because now that same Wolf River Gala netted over $200,000 this year. And technology is such a huge part of that. We got tons of items online. People aren't there necessarily to bid physically at the event. It's something that goes on for a week or two after. Technologies have been hugely helpful to all the organizations that have served for their big fundraising events.
Yeah, Francis.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked at the organization where I thought, oh my gosh, we can never go digital, and going digital was the best thing ever, because you're right, we brought in this national audience that we weren't serving past Memphis. I have two thoughts on digital. Even though the pandemic forced us into doing a lot of technology, I mean, we have to remember that even pre-pandemic, we were all doing things on our phones, right? Like, it was rare that I was registering for an event on my computer unless you happen to get me during work hours. So I think that mobile piece of it, even if your organization is so small and you just cannot fathom an online auction or some of these softwares that can be really expensive, if nothing else, make sure that it's mobile friendly, because your constituents are more than likely doing that on their phones, from your Facebook, from your LinkedIn, from these spots. And when you're considering the move to technology and using technology, I'd say consider your capacity, staffing and dollar wise. Again, those softwares can be incredibly expensive, but like, your facilities might not accommodate a hybrid event. It might have to be one or the other, and that's okay. I think just making sure that you let everybody know, because we've all come to expect this hybrid, everything can be digital. So if it's only going to be in person, make sure that you note that, because that might drive your attendance, right? If people know that they can't sit at home in their jammies, they might actually put on a real pair of pants and come see you. So I think just clear communication again, and then leveraging your capacity and the way the world is working.
Yeah. And I will say, before Elizabeth chimes in, you're seeing companies encourage the employees, like, hey, we need you out in the community. We need you out to be the face. We need you to be volunteering. We need you to go out. And I think, individuals are hungering for that as well. So that's kind of the good news, is that we are seeing, people to get really out and get involved, and you're seeing that energy level pick up. Elizabeth, go ahead and add your thoughts around technology.
Well, personally, I love a QR code. It makes it so easy being at an event and having QR codes to donate right on the spot, or like they said, bid right on the spot. And they've both David and Francis both kind of touched on this, but having that opportunity to, maybe you want to open up your silent auction a couple days before your event to get people really excited about the items that you have in there. Maybe you decide to close it a day late just to kind of, get people, all right, let's see how long we keep this going. It really kind of opens up the possibilities for you to bring in continuous funds. And then, like everybody said here, it streamlines process and make things so much easier. Check in, check out, bidding, donating, you don't even have to have your credit card on you at events these days. There's, you can do Apple Pay or Apple Wallet or whatever, and it just makes things so much easier. So obviously us moving into 2023, like Francis said, everybody's already on their phones anyways, and usually don't find people without them. It just makes it so much easier. So nonprofits really just kind of have to move with the times if they want to stay relevant in the event space.
So I'm seeing a few great comments around all of that. This is Rachel. Transitioning to an online auction and in-person viewing has benefited our tennis invitational silent auction so much. It's a lot of work prior, but totally worth it. I recommend creating a QR code for each auction item that links to the item online, quicker bidding for people attending the event. Andrew talks about the power of QR codes, and Rachel adds, we open ours 2 weeks in advance, but add items every day to increase excitement. And so a lot of psychology around this in terms of, bidding end of the night of the party. It works well. Marketing is key. So all of this around communication and, the psychological piece of this. So I'm going to add mine, and then I'll ask, so I'm giving the panel some time to think about theirs. But when you talk about one more tip, and this can be broad, you can go in any direction, but one more tip in terms of how to be creative, how to help create more successful fundraising events. Mine is around something that we talk a lot about on our end, is going back to the ROI, especially for sponsors, corporate sponsors. one of the things that we like to do, and this goes even to training volunteers, is we like to have greeters, connectors, if you will. We really call them connectors, but who can connect the different individuals. So if you're hosting like a VIP area for the corporate sponsors, or just in general as they're coming in, each of the connectors know who they're trying to connect the individuals to. So they have a hit list. In other words, my job is to connect Dusky with David and Elizabeth with Francis. And at the end of the night, they come back and they report, hey, I was able to connect these individuals. And what that does is, for us, we can then circle back with the sponsors, the donors, the individuals, and say, hey, thank you so much for your support. It was so awesome seeing you last night. It was so great to be able to introduce you to da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And for them, it blows them away, because they're like, wow, look at all these connections that we were able to make, these relationships. And so for those who that's an important piece of it, which for corporate sponsors it is, even if they don't tell you that, it is, it allows us to control the narrative and to show them the ROI of this event, which then leads to increased sponsorships the next year. So that's my tip, is be very mindful, back to knowing your audience, having intentionality around connecting people, building those relationships, and obviously then connecting them to the mission. But being able to control that, to report back, has been a huge piece of success for the different events and things that I've worked on. So that's my tip. Dusky, let's bounce to you.
My tip would be assume nothing. And as event planners, we assumed nothing prior to COVID, but I would say that rule really applies now more than ever. And assume nothing, I mean, don't assume that the police department has you covered on your event, on something they've always covered before. And Elizabeth, yes, I smile at you, as we had a learning there. It doesn't matter that they communicated that they have you covered. They've got you on the books. Yes, we've got you planned. It's going back and over repeating and over verifying. We talked about the staffing issues. So my tip is just making sure that your vendors that you've contracted that week that nothing's popped up, that they're still able to meet your demands and your request, and that everything's been communicated down, and having points of contact, cell phone numbers. So my tips would just be assume nothing, verify, and verify again, and working with a lot of empathy and compassion with the vendors that you're working with. So there are staffing considerations that they're working under right now, working with empathy and compassion to make sure they can deliver what you need them to deliver that night.
Yeah, that's awesome insight. David?
Yep. I would echo what I see over in the chat with Andrew and Ernie are both talking about, is thank yous, right? So, best practice with a donor is to thank them 7 times before you ask them for something again, right? And whether that's handwritten notes or an email, text, a call, you see them in person. Doesn't just have to be you thanking them. Maybe the executive director thanks them. But it's not just your donors, right? You need to thank your volunteers. You need to thank your vendors, even though you're paying them. They did a good job. Thank them. Recognize them. Make everybody feel really good, and make everybody feel ownership in the success of the event. And so I can't stress enough how important it is to thank people as soon as it's over, leading up to it, a couple weeks later. Thank them leading up to the event next year. Want to thank you again for helping us have such a successful event in 2022. Hope we can count on you in 2023, right? So just that's my tip. Just thank people, make them feel good.
Thank you, David. That's a good tip. Francis?
Yeah, I'll echo that. But then I also want to have you consider what sets your organization apart. What is it about your organization or your event that is so special that makes people want to fall in love with it in the first place? And then leveraging that during your event, whether it's the fact that you can connect people to people, right? Artists to collectors, or people to the actual assets of your organization, like at the Children's Museum. How can we connect them to our exhibits that we have? We spent a lot of money on them. Let's make sure that people know that we've got a FedEx airplane and this cool skyscraper and all these other assets. But really just figuring out what it is for your organization and then connecting people to that during the event.
Yeah, definitely. Elizabeth?
I kind of follow suit with thank you is a huge piece of just end of event follow-up is key. But then, probably my biggest tip would be ready for change, be ready to roll with the punches and have a plan B. If you're an outdoor event, how do you plan for rain or for wind? If you think you're going to have a step and repeat that is going to go up perfectly, and there's one piece missing in the move to your event. How do you plan to set something up in that spot? You know, just and you know, Dusky mentioned the you know, expecting things that have happened for many years that don't come to fruition this year. Be ready to have kind of those communications in your back pocket so that you have them ready to go. You can call them and say, hey, you know, where do we drop the ball here, and what do we need to do to get this back on track? So just be ready for change and shifts, and have a plan B.
Well, and that's, you know, what they're talking about is a really good point, where there's a lot of turnover right now. And so don't assume that the individuals you were working with 2 months ago to say yes to all these things are there anymore. And so back to, you know, over communicate, verify, just as really everyone's talking about, is really important. Even the day prior, and, you know, even the morning of the event, is making sure that just checking in, everything's good. And then, you know, just like all of you are talking about too, do a debrief after the event while everything is fresh. Figure out, you know, what went well, give the thank yous, and, you know, what could we do better? And so I think there's a lot of this stuff that are just great best practices that all of us can use to create more successful fundraising events. And
Jeremy,
with that, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you know, you kind of touched on that real quick, is ask, you know, and you definitely want to say those thank yous, but make sure when you include in your, maybe it's a newsletter or your thank you email, that you do ask for feedback, because you do want people to go out and obviously say, oh, this was a great event, we had a great time. But if there are things as you as an event planner that maybe don't make it to your ear, of, oh, this happened over here, we didn't know this was going on, but, you know, 2 of our guests encountered this, you know, make sure you include a link maybe that comes to an email back to you that says, please share your experience with us, whether it was negative or positive, so that you have those real facts to better plan for next year as well.
Yeah. And you can also use all of this to, we're doing this now, ask for Google reviews, which now have become a big deal, that weren't necessarily, you know, 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, but now Google reviews. And so if you enjoyed the event, if you enjoy what we're doing, please leave us a review. So all these things that go back in to ultimately create more successful fundraising events, but also to obviously raise more money, raise more awareness, get more volunteers supporting the mission, but to ultimately help lift the nonprofits and lift our community as a whole. So one of the other great tips is start on time, end on time. And so definitely want to thank again our amazing panelists. So thank you, Dusky, David, Francis, Elizabeth. Thank you for all you do in our community, but for serving obviously as our esteemed panelists. So thank you for your time and your expertise. Thank you everyone for logging in. We will follow up with a thank you for attending email that will have a recap. We'll also link you directly to each of the panelists so you can carry this conversation forward. But thank you for your time. Thank you everyone for working with us to power the good. We will see you again very soon. Enjoy the rest of your day and weekend ahead. And of course, go Grizz. Bye everyone.
Bye.